The lantern swayed in my grip, casting long shadows across the stone walls of Blackwood Military Academy. The flame danced behind glass, illuminating just enough of the path ahead to keep us from stumbling. Beside me walked James, his silhouette familiar as my own reflection, though somehow more assured, more certain in every step. The academy grounds stretched vast and silent around us, all the other cadets tucked away in their dormitories while we patrolled the midnight perimeter. "Section 4 clear," James murmured into his radio, his voice low and rough from the evening chill. I watched his breath form clouds in the autumn air, dissipating like the words I could never seem to find when it mattered most. Only the whisper of our footsteps on gravel broke the stillness. That and the hammering of my heart, which I prayed he couldn't hear. Earlier that day, we'd stood shoulder to shoulder in formation, the evening sun casting long rays across the parade grounds. Our company had been drilling since 1500 hours, marching, pivoting, standing at rigid attention while Captain Harrow barked corrections that echoed off the academy's ancient walls. I could feel sweat trickling down my spine beneath my dress grays. "Arlington, straighten that line," Harrow called out, and I quickly adjusted my stance, keeping my eyes fixed forward. James stood directly to my right, as he had for most of our 3 years at Blackwood. Our shoulders nearly touched, close enough that I could sense the heat radiating from his body, the subtle shift of his weight from one foot to another. Even without looking, I knew the exact expression on his face. Jaw set, dark eyebrows drawn slightly together in concentration, lips pressed into a determined line. At last, the bugle sounded retreat. The sunset ceremony concluded with the lowering of the flag, and Harrow dismissed us with a curt nod. All around, cadets broke formation with visible relief. "Christ," James muttered, rolling his shoulders as we walked back to the barracks. Harrow was in rare form today. I nodded, allowing myself a sideways glance at him. The sunset painted his profile in gold and amber, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the straight bridge of his nose. My stomach tightened with a familiar ache, the one I'd spent years pushing down, ignoring, denying. We reached the stone steps of Hamilton Hall and sank down side by side. James unlaced his boots with a sigh of relief, and I did the same, our shoulders brushing as we leaned forward. A simple touch, innocent, accidental, yet electricity seemed to course through that single point of contact. I shifted away slightly, concentrating on the intricate crosshatch of my bootlaces as if they contained the secrets of the universe. "You okay, Eli?" James asked, noticing my sudden stillness. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Just tired. Calculus exam tomorrow." He nodded, accepting the lie without question. I'd become adept at these small deceptions, these carefully constructed reasons for my occasional silences, my averted eyes. "We should be studying instead of walking the grounds tonight," he said, pulling off his boots and flexing his toes. "But at least we're assigned together. Coleman got stuck with Peterson." I laughed at that. Peterson was notorious for his endless chatter about conspiracy theories and his hometown girlfriend. "Poor Coleman." James grinned, bumping his shoulder against mine deliberately this time. "See? Could be worse." That grin, the one that started slowly and then took over his entire face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It made something in my chest constrict painfully. For 3 years, we'd been roommates, best friends, brothers in arms. For 3 years, I told myself that what I felt was admiration, camaraderie, the natural bond between soldiers who train together, who rely on each other. But in moments like these, with the day's last light gilding his profile and his shoulder warm against mine, the truth whispered insistently beneath every heartbeat. "This is more. This has always been more." "I'm going to grab a shower before mess," James said, standing and slinging his boots over one shoulder. He extended his other hand to me, and I took it, allowing him to pull me to my feet. His grip was firm, calloused from years of rifle drills and obstacle courses. He held on a beat longer than necessary, giving my hand a quick squeeze before letting go. "Save me a seat?" he asked, already backing toward the door. "Always do," I replied, the words catching slightly in my throat. He flashed that grin again before disappearing into the barracks, leaving me alone with the setting sun and the weight of everything unsaid. The mess hall buzzed with the usual evening cacophony, clattering trays, overlapping conversations, occasional bursts of laughter. I sat at our usual table, a plate of untouched meatloaf and potatoes before me, my calculus textbook open beside it. The equations blurred together as my mind wandered back to the touch of James's hand, the way his fingers had wrapped around mine with such casual strength. "Earth to Arlington," came a voice, and suddenly James was there, sliding onto the bench across from me, his hair still damp from the shower. He smelled of standard-issue soap, and that indefinable something that was uniquely him, something like cedar and clean sweat and wool uniforms. "Sorry," I mumbled, closing my textbook. Miles away. "Calculus that fascinating?" he teased, digging into his food with enthusiasm. "Or is it Emily Carter? Saw her watching you during drill today." I forced a laugh, stabbing at my meatloaf. "Not interested." "No, half the guys in third company would give their weekend passes for a chance with her." I shrugged, avoiding his eyes. This was familiar territory. James occasionally trying to gauge my interest in the female cadets or local girls, me deflecting as casually as possible. Sometimes I wondered if he suspected anything, if my careful neutrality raised questions. "You're a strange one, Arlington," he said, but his tone was affectionate. He reached across the table and stole a roll from my plate. "More focused on graduation than romance, I guess?" "Something like that," I agreed, grateful for the easy explanation. We ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Around us, the noise of the mess hall ebbed and flowed. At the next table over, a group of first-years were engaged in an animated debate about tactical strategy, their voices rising with youthful conviction. Seniors at another table discussed post-graduation assignments in hushed, serious tones. "We should head back soon," James said, checking his watch. "Night patrol starts at 2300. I nodded, gathering my books. As we stood to leave, Staff Sergeant Reynolds approached our table, his weathered face set in its usual stern expression. "Arlington, Evans," he acknowledged with a curt nod. "Your patrol route tonight has changed. You'll be taking the north perimeter wall instead of the usual east quadrant." James straightened slightly beside me. "Any particular reason, sir?" Reynolds' mouth tightened. "Security concerns. There have been reports of local kids trying to sneak onto grounds, likely just for thrills, but we're not taking chances. The north wall backs up against the woods, makes for easier access. Keep your eyes open." "Yes, sir," we responded in unison. As Reynolds moved away, James turned to me, one eyebrow raised. "The north perimeter? That's nearly 2 miles of wall." "And the most isolated section," I added, trying to ignore the sudden flutter in my stomach at the thought of hours alone with James in the darkness, far from the main buildings. "Well," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, "at least we'll have each other for company." His hand lingered for a moment, warm and heavy through the fabric of my uniform, before he pulled away. I swallowed hard, nodding agreement without trusting myself to speak. The north perimeter of Blackwood Academy ran along an ancient stone wall that separated the manicured grounds from the dense forest beyond. Built in the 1800s, the wall stood 12 feet high, a formidable barrier topped with decorative but still effective iron spikes. During daylight hours, it looked picturesque, ivy-covered in sections, with small guard towers at regular intervals that were now used mainly as observation points rather than for actual defense. At night, however, it transformed into something more foreboding. Shadows gathered thick against its base, and the forest beyond seemed to press closer, branches reaching toward the stones like questing fingers. We set out just before 2300 hours, each of us carrying a standard-issue lantern and radio. James also had the patrol map tucked into his breast pocket, though we both knew the route by heart. Our boots crunched on the gravel path that ran parallel to the wall, marking time like a metronome. The night was clear and cold, stars pricking the sky above us in familiar constellations. I'd always loved astronomy, finding comfort in the ancient patterns overhead. My father had taught me the stars before he died, tracing Orion's belt and the curve of the Big Dipper with patient fingers against the night sky of our backyard. Now I searched for those same patterns automatically, orienting myself by their unchanging presence. Beautiful night, James commented, following my gaze upward. His breath clouded in the chill air. Yeah, I agreed softly. Reminds me of home. James knew about my father, about the cancer that had taken him during my first year at Blackwood. He'd been the one to sit with me through that long night after the phone call, the one who'd accompanied me to the funeral despite barely knowing me then. Some bonds form quickly under the right circumstances, forged in grief and shared silence. We walked without speaking for a while, the rhythm of our steps falling naturally into sync. This was perhaps what I loved most about being with James, the ease between us, the lack of pressure to fill every moment with words. We could just be together, comfortable in the quiet. The first guard tower loomed ahead, a stone sentinel against the night sky. We climbed the narrow spiral staircase single file, our lanterns casting wild dancing shadows against the curved walls. At the top, a small circular chamber offered a panoramic view of the surrounding area, academy buildings to one side, forest to the other, stretching dark and mysterious to the horizon. All clear, James murmured, scanning the tree line methodically before speaking into his radio to report our position. The protocol was familiar. Check in at each tower, report any unusual sightings, make a full circuit of the perimeter before returning to base. I moved to the opposite window, ostensibly to check my own section, but found my gaze drawn to James instead. The lantern light played across his features, highlighting the strong curve of his cheekbone, the determined set of his jaw. He'd grown into his looks during our time at Blackwood, his boyish features maturing into something more defined, more compelling. At 18, he'd been handsome in a rough-hewn way. Now, at 21, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that drew the eye. My eye especially. James turned suddenly, catching me staring. Rather than looking away, I found myself frozen, trapped in his gaze like a deer in headlights. Something passed between us in that moment, a current of awareness, a question else asked. We should continue, he said finally, his voice slightly rougher than before. Still have the whole perimeter to cover. I nodded, grateful for the dimness that hid the heat I could feel rising in my face. We descended the tower in silence and resumed our patrol, walking perhaps a bit farther apart than before. The next section of wall curved gently, following the natural contour of the land. To our right, the academy grounds sloped away, dotted with the dark shapes of training equipment and obstacle courses. In daylight, this area bustled with activity, cadets running drills, shouting encouragement, pushing their bodies to the limits of endurance. Now it lay silent and still, like a stage after the actors had departed. Remember when Peterson got stuck on the climbing wall during basic training? James asked suddenly, breaking the silence. I laughed, the tension easing from my shoulders. How could I forget? He hung there screaming like he was being murdered instead of dangling 6 feet off the ground. And Harrow just stood there with that look on his face, like he was questioning every life choice that had led him to that moment. I finished, and we both dissolved into quiet laughter. It was always like this, the easy slide into shared memories, the shorthand that develops between people who have lived in each other's pockets for years. I treasured these moments, even as they twisted something painful inside me. The knowledge that this closeness had boundaries, limits I couldn't cross without risking everything. Our path took us past the small campfire area where weekend gatherings were sometimes held, faculty-supervised events with carefully rationed beers for seniors and s'mores for everyone. The fire pit sat cold and empty now, but the wooden benches surrounding it offered a tempting rest stop. Let's take 5, James suggested, nodding toward the benches. We're ahead of schedule. We sat side by side, setting our lanterns on the ground before us. The mingled light cast our shadows, elongated and wavering against the nearby wall. I watched as our shadow selves leaned slightly toward each other, merging at the edges in a way our real selves never quite did. From somewhere deep in the woods beyond the wall came the haunting call of an owl, a lonesome sound that seemed to echo something inside my chest. James tilted his head, listening, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered silver flask. Contraband, Evans? I asked, raising an eyebrow in mock scandal. He grinned, that slow-spreading smile that always made my heart stutter. Special occasions only. And what's the occasion? His expression softened slightly as he unscrewed the cap. 3 years today since we became roommates. The simple fact that he remembered, that he considered it worth marking, sent warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with the promised alcohol. "You kept track?" "Of course," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He took a quick swig from the flask, then offered it to me, to the best damn roommate a guy could ask for. Our fingers brushed as I accepted the flask, and there it was again. That jolt of awareness, that electric current that seemed to pass between us at the slightest contact. I took a hasty drink, welcoming the burn of whiskey down my throat, using the moment to collect myself. "Smooth," I commented, handing the flask back. "My dad's favorite," James replied, taking another sip before tucking it away. "He'd probably kill me if he knew I'd filched it from his study." We fell silent again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, charged, expectant, like the air before a storm. I could feel James looking at me, his gaze a tangible weight against my skin. "Eli," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Yeah?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. He hesitated, then sighed, shaking his head. "Nothing. We should keep moving." Whatever moment had been building dissipated like morning mist. We stood, retrieved our lanterns, and continued our patrol, the wall stretching before us like the boundary it was. Solid, ancient, immovable. The second guard tower marked the halfway point of our patrol route. As we climbed the narrow stairs, I found myself hyper-aware of James ahead of me. The breadth of his shoulders in the confined space, the way his uniform jacket pulled taut across his back with each upward step. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the stone steps, counting them silently to distract myself. At the top, James moved immediately to the north-facing window, peering out into the darkness beyond the wall. I took up position at the east window, dutifully scanning the empty grounds below while trying to calm my racing thoughts. "Eli," James called softly, "come look at this." I moved to join him, standing close enough that our shoulders brushed. Outside, the forest pressed dark against the wall, but above it, the northern lights had begun to dance, pale green and purple streamers unfurling across the night sky. It wasn't common to see them this far south, making the display all the more magical. "Aurora Borealis," I murmured, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. "It's incredible," James replied, his face upturned to the heavens, bathed in the shifting colors. In that moment, with the ethereal light playing across his features, he looked almost otherworldly, beautiful in a way that made my chest ache with longing. Without thinking, I said, "You're incredible." The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. James turned to me slowly, his expression unreadable in the dimness. We stood facing each other, barely a foot apart, the silence stretching taut as a bowstring. "I meant," I started, searching desperately for some way to reframe my words, to make them something other than the confession they were. "The patrol map," James cut in, his voice carefully neutral. "I need to check our next waypoint." He reached into his breast pocket, pulling out the folded map with hands that seemed less steady than usual. As he unfolded it between us, our fingers brushed, lingered, tangled briefly before I pulled away as if burned. But not before I felt it, the slight pressure of his fingers against mine, the whisper of intentionality in the touch. My heart thundered in my chest, blood rushing in my ears. Had I imagined it? That deliberate pressure, that moment of contact that felt different from all the casual touches we'd shared before? James bent over the map, his face hidden from me now. "We need to check the eastern corner," he said, all business. "There's a section where the wall's lower than the rest." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and followed him back down the viewer stairs. The night seemed to have shifted somehow, reality tilting slightly on its axis. Everything looked the same. The stone wall, the path beneath our feet, the familiar silhouette of James walking ahead of me. Yet nothing felt the same. That touch lingered like a ghost against my skin as we continued our patrol in silence. The eastern corner of the north wall had indeed weathered badly, the stones crumbling in places, making it a potential security concern. We inspected it carefully, our lanterns held high to illuminate the damage. "We should note this in the patrol report," James said, running his hand along a particularly worn section. "This whole area needs repair before winter." I nodded agreement, watching the play of muscles in his forearm as he tested the stability of the stones. Such a simple movement, yet it captured my attention completely. The casual strength in his hands, the focused intensity in his expression. "Eli," he said suddenly, turning to face me. "I've been thinking." The crackle of the radio cut him off, making us both jump. "North Patrol, come in. This is base." The static-laced voice of the duty officer broke the stillness. James unclipped his radio. "North Patrol here. Go ahead, base. We've got reports of movement in the woods near your position. Local security picked up heat signatures about a quarter-mile from the wall. Probably just deer, but check it out." "Copy that," James responded. "We'll investigate and report back." He clipped the radio back to his belt and met my eyes. "Looks like we're going off campus." The Academy's jurisdiction extended beyond the wall in certain areas, particularly where security concerns were involved. We had the authority to investigate potential breaches, though we were required to stay in radio contact and avoid unnecessary risks. A small gate was set into the wall nearby, locked, but we both carried the standard-issue keys that would open it. James unlocked the heavy iron mechanism, and the gate swung outward with a low groan of protest. Beyond lay the forest, dense and shadowed, the trees standing like sentinels against the night sky. We stepped through together, our lanterns carving small pockets of light from the darkness. The temperature seemed to drop as soon as we passed beyond the wall, the air heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. Our boots crunched on fallen leaves and twigs, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness. I stayed close to James, our shoulders occasionally brushing as we navigated between the trees. "You were saying something," I ventured after we'd walked a few yards into the woods. "Back at the wall, before the radio call." James glanced at me, his expression half hidden in shadow. "It was nothing important." But something in his voice suggested otherwise, a tension, a hesitation that sparked my curiosity. "James, shh," he interrupted, holding up a hand. "Did you hear that?" We both froze, listening intently. At first, I heard nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the night breeze. Then, a crackle of underbrush, the snap of a twig breaking beneath weight. Something was moving in the darkness ahead of us. James raised his lantern higher, peering into the gloom. "Hello?" he called out. "This is Blackwood Academy Security. Identify yourselves." No response came, but the sounds of movement increased, faster now, moving away from us. "Should we pursue?" I asked, adrenaline beginning to course through my veins. James hesitated, then shook his head. "Reynolds said to investigate, not engage. Let's report what we heard and head back to the wall." He reached for his radio, but as he did, a new sound cut through the night, a human cry, high and frightened, followed by the thud of someone falling. Without discussion, we both broke into a run toward the source of the sound, lanterns swinging wildly as we dodged between trees. We burst into a small clearing to find a young boy, no more than 12 or 13, sprawled on the ground, clutching his ankle. He looked up at us with wide, terrified eyes, scrambling backward as our lanterns illuminated his face. "It's okay," James said immediately, lowering both his lantern and his voice. "We're not going to hurt you. Are you injured?" The boy stared at us, taking in our uniforms with obvious apprehension. "Are you going to arrest me? I wasn't doing anything wrong. I just wanted to see the school. My brother went there before he... His voice broke, and I suddenly understood. There had been a cadet death last year, a training accident during a river crossing exercise. Richard Turner, a senior who'd been well-liked and respected. This must be his younger brother. You're Turner's brother," I said gently, kneeling down to his level. "What's your name?" "Michael," he replied, his voice small. "Michael Turner." James knelt beside me, setting his lantern on the ground. "Let me see that ankle, Michael." The boy hesitantly extended his leg, wincing as James carefully examined the injury. "Just a sprain, I think," James concluded, "but you shouldn't be walking on it." He looked at the boy with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "What were you doing out here alone at night? It's dangerous." Michael's eyes filled with tears. Tomorrow's the anniversary of Ricky's accident. I wanted to see where he lived, where he was happy. Mom wouldn't take me. She can't even talk about him without breaking down. I exchanged a glance with James, reading in his expression the same compassion I felt. Academy policy was clear. Trespassers were to be reported immediately, no exceptions. But this wasn't just any trespasser. We need to get you home, James said finally. Where do you live? The village, about 2 miles that way. Michael pointed northeast. But I can't go home yet. I haven't even seen the academy. James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Michael. What if we take you back through the... I interrupted. Just for a few minutes. You can see the parade ground where your brother marched, and then we'll figure out how to get you home. James gave me a surprised look. I was usually the one who adhered strictly to regulations, but then he nodded slowly. 5 minutes, he agreed, and then we call for a vehicle to take you home. Relief and excitement replaced the fear on Michael's face. Really? You do that? For Cadet Turner's brother? Yes, James said firmly. But you'll need help walking. Without hesitation, James scooped the boy up in his arms. Michael looked startled for a moment, then relaxed, his small hands gripping James's uniform jacket. Something twisted in my chest as I watched them. James's strong arms, cradling the boy so carefully, his expression gentle in the lantern light. It was a side of him I rarely saw. This tenderness, this nurturing instinct. It made me love him even more, a fact that both terrified and exhilarated me. We made our way slowly back toward the wall, James carrying Michael while I held both lanterns high to light our path. The journey seemed shorter somehow, the woods less forbidding with our unexpected companion. As we neared the gate, James shifted the boy's weight in his arms and looked at me over Michael's head. His eyes held a warmth and approval that made my breath catch. Good call, he said softly. Breaking protocol. I smiled, a flutter of pleasure warming my chest at his words. Learned from the kid. You're always saying some rules need bending. His answering smile, slow, intimate, meant just for me, sent heat coursing through my veins. We reached the gate and passed back through the wall onto academy grounds. I locked the heavy iron door behind us while James carefully set Michael down, allowing him to lean on us for support as he took in the view of Blackwood at night. The grand old buildings with their Gothic spires silhouetted against the star-strewn sky, the parade ground where his brother had marched, the flagpole where the colors were raised and lowered each day. It's just like Ricky described it, Michael whispered, awe in his voice. He loved it here, you know. Said it was the first place he ever felt like he belonged. James's hand found my shoulder, squeezing gently. I glanced at him, finding his gaze already on me. Something unreadable in his expression. I know exactly what he meant, he said quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. The moment stretched between us, heavy with unspoken meaning, until Michael shifted his weight, wincing as he accidentally put pressure on his injured ankle. We should call for transport, I said, reluctantly breaking the connection. Get Michael home. James nodded, releasing my shoulder to reach for his radio. As he made the call, arranging for a staff vehicle to take Michael home and explaining the situation to a surprisingly understanding Reynolds, I found myself standing at the edge of a precipice, heart racing, palms sweating, every nerve ending alive with possibility. Something had changed tonight. In the quiet moments between patrols, in the touch of fingers over a map, in the looks exchanged by lantern light, something had shifted, boundaries blurring like shadows in the darkness. The duty vehicle arrived 20 minutes later, and we helped Michael into the back seat, promising to let him visit properly someday, with permission. As the taillights disappeared down the access road, James and I were left alone once more in the pool of light cast by our lanterns. We should finish the patrol, I said, though what I wanted was to continue the conversation that had been interrupted, to ask what he'd been about to say at the wall, to understand the meaning behind his looks, his touches. Yeah, James agreed, but made no move to start walking. Instead, he turned to face me fully, his expression serious in the flickering light. Eli, there's something I've been wanting to tell you for a while now. My heart hammered against my ribs, hope and fear warring in my chest. What is it? He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. It's about us, he began, his voice low and uncertain. About how I... The sudden, harsh crackle of the radio made us both start. North Patrol, come in. What's your 20? You're overdue at checkpoint 3. James closed his eyes briefly, frustration evident in the tight line of his mouth. He unclipped the radio and responded with admirable composure. North Patrol here. We're at the east corner gate. Had a situation with a trespasser. Minor issue. Handled now. Heading to checkpoint 3. Copy that. Base out. He clipped the radio back to his belt and sighed, the moment clearly broken. We should go, he said, regret coloring his voice. They'll send someone to check on us if we don't hit the next checkpoint soon. I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. Lead the way. We resumed our patrol, following the wall as it curved back toward the main academy buildings. The silence between us now was charged, expectant, full of words unspoken, confessions hovering on the edge of utterance. As we approached the final guard tower, the one that marked the junction between the north wall and the more populated west perimeter, James suddenly stopped walking. This has been the strangest patrol, he said, shaking his head with a small laugh. Because of Michael? Not just that. He turned to face me, lantern light casting half his face in gold, half in shadow. Eli, about what I was trying to say earlier. You don't have to, I interrupted, suddenly afraid. Of rejection. Of misreading the signs. Of losing the friendship that meant everything to me. It's late. We're tired. No, he said firmly. I need to say this. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that made my knees weak. I've been feeling... The distant sound of footsteps on gravel cut him off once more. We both turned to see the beam of a flashlight approaching, the West Patrol, right on schedule. James made a sound of pure frustration, running a hand roughly through his hair. Terrible timing, he muttered. The West Patrol, Coleman and Rodriguez, came into view, their lanterns bobbing as they walked toward us. Evans, Arlington, Coleman called in greeting. Quiet night? Not exactly, James replied, his voice clipped. Had a situation in the woods. As they came closer, James shifted subtly, putting a few more inches of space between us. I felt the loss like a physical pain. We exchanged brief reports with the other patrol team, the conversation limited to duty-related matters. Throughout, I was acutely aware of James beside me, the tension in his posture, the way his gaze kept drifting to me when he thought I wasn't looking. Finally, the West Patrol continued on their route, leaving us alone once more. But the moment had been well and truly broken, the confession, whatever it might have been, pushed back into the realm of the unspoken. We should head back, James said, glancing at his watch. Our shift's almost over. I nodded, unable to hide my disappointment. Another time interrupted. He looked at me then, something vulnerable crossing his face. There will be other times, Eli, he said softly. I promise. We made our way back toward Central Campus, our footsteps crunching in sync on the gravel path. The main academy buildings loomed ahead, windows mostly dark at this late hour. In less than 30 minutes, we would sign out at the security office, return our equipment, and head back to our shared room in Hamilton Hall. The thought of being alone with James there, in the private space that had been ours for 3 years, sent a wave of nervous anticipation through me. Would he finish what he'd started to say? Would I find the courage to speak my own truth? As we reached the final stretch of path before the security office, a light rain began to fall, soft, misty droplets that caught the lantern light like suspended diamonds. James stopped walking, tilting his face up to the sky. I've always loved rain at night, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Everything seems possible somehow. I stood beside him, watching the rain create halos around the campus lampposts, feeling the cool moisture on my face. What seems possible to you right now? I asked, surprising myself with the boldness of the question. James turned to me, raindrops clinging to his eyelashes, sheening his skin. There was something raw in his expression, hope and fear and determination all mingled together. "This," he said simply, and reached out to grasp my arm. His fingers curled around my bicep, warm and solid through the fabric of my uniform. "Stay close," he added, his voice dropping even lower. "I don't want to lose you out here." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. Those words, spoken with such quiet intensity, his eyes never leaving mine, they couldn't be misinterpreted. Not with his hand still on my arm, his thumb moving in a small, deliberate circle against my sleeve. I stood frozen, the lantern trembling slightly in my grip, my heart racing so fast I felt lightheaded. The rain fell harder around us, drumming on the gravel, sliding down our faces like tears. "James," I whispered, my voice catching in my throat. "What are you saying?" His fingers tightened on my arm, and he drew a shaky breath, rain glistening on his lips as he parted them to speak. James began, but the sudden beam of a flashlight cut through the rain, illuminating our faces. "Evans! Arlington!" Captain Harrow's voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "Why are you standing in the rain instead of completing your patrol report?" James dropped his hand from my arm, the warmth of his touch vanishing as quickly as it had come. We both snapped to attention, water streaming down our faces. "Sir!" "Just finished our patrol route, sir," James responded, his voice steady despite the tremor I'd heard in it moments before. Harrow regarded us with suspicious eyes, his flashlight beam moving between our faces. "Well, don't just stand there getting soaked. Report to the security office immediately." "Yes, sir," we answered in unison. As Harrow walked away, I glanced at James, desperate to recapture the moment that had been broken, but his expression had closed off, the vulnerability I'd glimpsed now, hidden behind the mask of a perfect cadet. "Come on," he said quietly. "Let's go." We walked the remaining distance to the security office in silence, the only sounds the steady drumming of rain and the squish of our waterlogged boots on gravel. The moment, whatever it had been, was gone, dissolved by the rain and Harrow's interruption. In the harsh fluorescent light of the security office, we signed out, returned our equipment, and filed our report. I watched James's hands as he wrote, steady, methodical, betraying nothing of what had transpired between us. His wet hair fell across his forehead, and a droplet of water traced the line of his jaw before disappearing into the collar of his uniform. "Good patrol, cadets," the night duty officer said, barely glancing at our report. "Dismissed." Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the campus gleaming under the security lights. Dawn was still hours away, but already the eastern sky showed the faintest lightning at its edge. We walked toward Hamilton Hall, our footsteps echoing in the pre-dawn stillness. At the door to our room, James paused, key in hand. He turned to me, his face half in shadow. "Eli, about earlier, it's late," I interrupted, suddenly afraid of what he might say. What if I had misinterpreted everything? What if he wanted to apologize, to establish boundaries, to make sure I understood his words had meant nothing beyond friendship? "We should get some sleep before Reveille." Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment? Relief? I couldn't tell. He nodded and unlocked the door. Our room was exactly as we'd left it hours before. 2 narrow beds, 2 desks, 2 wardrobes. Everything in perfect military order. Yet it felt different somehow, charged with a new awareness that crackled between us like static electricity. We changed in silence, backs turned to each other as we had done thousands of times before. But this time, I was conscious of every rustle of fabric, every soft exhalation of breath. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the wall before me, fighting the urge to turn, to look, to confirm what I had begun to hope. When I finally slipped beneath my blanket, James was already in his bed, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight streaming through the window painted silver stripes across his face. "Good night, Eli," he said softly. "Good night," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. I lay awake long after his breathing had evened into sleep, replaying his words by the gate. "Stay close. I don't want to lose you out here." What had he meant to say before Harrow interrupted us? The question circled in my mind until exhaustion finally pulled me under. into dreams filled with rain and reaching hands in words left unspoken. Reveille came all too soon, the bugle's call dragging me from troubled sleep. I opened my eyes to find James already up, standing at the window, his silhouette outlined against the pale dawn light. He turned at the sound of my movement, and our eyes met across the room. "Morning," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Morning," I echoed, sitting up and running a hand through my sleep-mussed hair. We moved around each other with practiced efficiency, preparing for the day, shaving, dressing, making our beds with precise hospital corners. But there was a new awkwardness between us, hesitation, where before there had been only the easy rhythm of long familiarity. At breakfast in the mess hall, James sat across from me as always, but his eyes rarely met mine. He maintained a steady stream of casual conversation about classes, about the upcoming tactical exercise, about everything except what had almost happened the night before. I responded in kind, grateful for the buffer of mundane topics, even as disappointment settled like a stone in my stomach. Around us, the mess hall buzzed with the usual morning activity. Sleepy first years gulping coffee, senior cadets reviewing notes for morning classes, faculty members moving between tables with cups of steaming tea. Everything was normal, ordinary. No one could see the seismic shift that had occurred between James and me, the fault line that had opened beneath our friendship. "Arlington." The booming voice of Tactical Officer Brandt cut through my thoughts. "Evans, report to Field C immediately after breakfast. You're on the demonstration team for today's close quarters exercise." "Yes, sir," we responded automatically. James's eyes finally met mine across the table, a flicker of something, anticipation, apprehension, crossing his face before he looked away again. "Demonstration team," he said, pushing his eggs around his plate. "That should be interesting." "Yeah," I agreed, my mouth suddenly dry. The close quarters exercise involved hand-to-hand combat techniques, takedowns, and partner drills, all requiring direct physical contact. After what had happened last night, the thought of James's hands on me, of my hands on him, sent heat coursing through my veins. We finished breakfast in silence and walked together to Field C, where Brent was already setting up the training area. A group of first-year cadets stood nervously at attention, watching as we approached. "Arlington, Evans," Brent acknowledged us with a curt nod. "You'll be demonstrating the defensive stance sequence and the partner takedown drill. First years need to see it done properly before they pair up." "Yes, sir," we replied. As the rest of the demonstration team arrived, we took our positions on the field. The morning sun had burned away the last of the night's rain, leaving the grass damp, but the air clear and crisp. James stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the clean scent of his soap, and the starch in his uniform. Brant blew his whistle, and the exercise began. James and I moved through the familiar sequence of defensive stances, our bodies responding to years of training, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought faltered. With each movement, we mirrored each other perfectly. Advance, retreat, block, counter. Then came the partner drills. "Evans, Arlington, front and center," Brant called. "Show the first years how it's done." We faced each other, falling into the standard starting position, feet shoulder-width apart, knees slightly bent, hands raised in a defensive guard. James's eyes met mine, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The watching cadets, Brant's barked instructions, the academy itself. There was only James, his gaze steady on mine, a world of unspoken words passing between us. "Begin," Brant ordered. James moved first, stepping into my space with controlled aggression. I responded automatically, catching his wrist, using his momentum to pull him off balance. But as I moved to execute the takedown, his free hand caught my shoulder, his fingers pressing into the exact spot where he had gripped me the night before. I faltered, my concentration slipping. In that moment of hesitation, James reversed the move, sweeping my legs from under me. I landed on my back with a thud that drove the air from my lungs, James following me down, his body poised above mine, one hand pinning my wrist to the ground. Our faces were inches apart, his breath warm against my cheek. Time seemed to slow, stretching like taffy between us. His eyes darkened, pupils dilating, and I felt rather than heard the small intake of his breath. Good takedown, Evans. Brant's voice shattered the moment. Arlington, you lost focus. Again. Both of you. James released my wrist and stood, offering his hand to help me up. As our palms met, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between us. I saw him feel it too, the slight widening of his eyes, the quick intake of breath. We moved through the drill again, and again, and again. Each time, the physical contact between us grew more charged, more deliberate. A hand lingering a beat too long on a shoulder. Fingers pressing with unnecessary firmness around a wrist. The brush of breath against an ear during a grapple. By the time Brant dismissed the demonstration team, I was trembling with a mixture of physical exertion and barely contained emotion. James looked no better, his face flushed, his breathing uneven as we walked together toward the equipment shed to store the training pads. Inside the small wooden structure, away from watchful eyes, James suddenly turned to me. Eli, he began, his voice low and urgent. We need to talk about last night. My heart hammered against my ribs. I know. Not here, he said, glancing toward the door. Not now, but soon. He ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing in disheveled spikes. I can't keep pretending. The door to the shed swung open, and we sprang apart like guilty children as two senior cadets entered, laughing about something that had happened during their morning drill. James gave me one last look, intense, meaningful, before slipping past the newcomers and out the door. The day dragged on interminably. Tactical classes, engineering lectures, military history seminars. Throughout it all, I was hyper-aware of James's presence, my body seeming to orient toward him like a compass needle finding north whenever we were in the same room. Occasionally, I would look up to find his eyes already on me, a question in their depths that I couldn't answer, not yet. After dinner, we retreated to our room to study, sitting at our respective desks with textbooks open before us. But I couldn't focus on the words swimming on the page, not with James mere feet away, the tension between us pulled taut as piano wire. I can't concentrate, James said finally, shutting his book with more force than necessary. I'm going to the common room. Maybe a change of scenery will help. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Part of me wanted to follow him immediately, but another part, the cautious, careful part that had kept my feelings hidden for so long, held me back. I gave him a 15-minute head start before closing my own book and making my way down to the common room. The large space was nearly empty at this hour, most cadets either still at dinner or sequestered in their rooms studying. A fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the worn leather furniture. James sat alone in the farthest corner, a book open on his lap, but his eyes fixed on the flames. I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He looked up as I neared, and the naked vulnerability in his expression nearly stopped my heart. Hey, I said, my voice barely audible over the crackling fire. Hey, he echoed, closing his book. Sit with me? I lowered myself onto the couch beside him, careful to leave space between us. The fire popped and hissed, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney. I've been thinking about last night, James began, his fingers worrying at the edge of his book cover, about what I was trying to say before Harrow interrupted. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. What were you trying to say? He turned to face me fully, his expression open, unguarded. I was trying to tell you that something's changed between us. Or maybe it was always there, and I'm only now brave enough to see it. The room seemed to tilt around me, reality shifting once again. James, let me finish, he said softly. Please, I've been rehearsing this all day. I nodded, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain he must hear it. James took a deep breath. For the longest time, I told myself what I felt for you was friendship, the kind of brotherhood that forms between soldiers. But last night, watching you with Michael, seeing the compassion in your eyes, the way you broke rules to help someone in need, something clicked into place. He paused, his gaze dropping to his hands. Or maybe it was just the final piece of a puzzle I've been piecing together for years. In the silence that followed, the log in the fireplace collapsed with a shower of embers. The golden light played across James's face, highlighting the uncertainty in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "I don't know what's happening to me," I blurted out, the words escaping before I could stop them. "But I can't stop thinking about you. Not as a friend, not as a brother in arms. Something more." James's breath caught audibly. He reached across the space between us, his hand hovering just above mine, not quite touching. "Eli," he whispered, my name a prayer on his lips. I felt it too, for months. But I thought I was alone. I thought if I ever said anything, I'd lose you completely. I turned my hand palm up, an invitation. His fingers trembled as they slid against mine, warm and calloused, and achingly familiar, yet somehow entirely new. "You could never lose me," I promised, my voice thick with emotion. Around us, the common room remained empty, the fire burning low, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, through the tall windows, the moon had risen, full and bright against the velvet black of the night sky. "We should go somewhere else," James said, reluctantly withdrawing his hand as voices echoed in the hallway beyond the common room door. "Somewhere private?" I nodded, understanding immediately. "The North Tower," I suggested. "No one patrols there this time of night?" We left the common room separately, careful not to draw attention. I went first, walking casually through the corridors of Hamilton Hall as if heading back to our room. Once outside, I kept to the shadows, making my way toward the ancient stone tower that stood at the northern edge of campus. The tower had once been a lookout post, but was now used mainly for storage, its heavy wooden door usually left unlocked. I slipped inside and climbed the narrow spiral staircase, emerging onto the small circular platform at the top. From here, the entire campus spread below me. Buildings and pathways outlined in silver moonlight. Minutes later, I heard footsteps on the stairs. James appeared at the top, slightly breathless from the climb. He stood framed in the doorway, his uniform silvered by moonlight, and my heart contracted painfully in my chest at the sight of him. "No one saw me," he said, stepping onto the platform. "We're alone." The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Alone. No interruptions, no prying eyes, no duties to perform or roles to play. Just James and me and the truth we'd been circling for longer than either of us had admitted. He moved closer until only inches separated us. I could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat, could count individual eyelashes as he looked down at me. "Are you scared?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Terrified," I admitted, "but not of this. Never of this." His hand came up slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted to. But I didn't want to. I hadn't wanted to for years. His palm cupped my cheek, warm and slightly rough against my skin, and I leaned into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. "I've thought about this," he confessed, his thumb tracing the line of my cheekbone. "About you. So many times I've lost count." "Me too," I whispered, my heart threatening to burst from my chest. "James, He leaned forward, closing the final distance between us, and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was gentle, hesitant, a question asked in the language of touch. I answered by sliding my hands up to his shoulders, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss with a boldness I hadn't known I possessed. Time lost all meaning as we stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, exploring this new territory between us. His hands moved from my face to my neck, then down to my waist, holding me as if I were something precious. I tangled my fingers in his hair, marveling at its softness, at the small sound he made when I tugged gently at the strands. When we finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, the moon had moved across the sky, stars shifting in their ancient patterns above us. James rested his forehead against mine. "Saw." His eyes closed, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've wanted to do that since our first year," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Since that night you stayed up with me when I got the letter about my mom's illness." I remembered that night clearly, sitting on James's bed, shoulder to shoulder, as he read and reread the letter from his father. How I'd wanted to pull him into my arms then, to comfort him with more than words. Instead, I'd maintained the careful distance of friendship, offering only what I thought he could accept. I wish I'd known, I said, running my thumb along his jawline, reveling in the freedom to touch him like this. We've wasted so much time. James caught my hand, pressing a kiss to my palm that sent shivers down my spine. We have time now, he said. But even as the words left his mouth, a shadow crossed his face. What is it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. James sighed, his arms tightening around me as if afraid I might disappear. You know what happens to cadets who get caught, like this? I did know. Blackwood Academy's code of conduct was explicit. Such relationships were grounds for immediate expulsion. Not just because we were both men, though that certainly compounded the offense, but because any romantic relationship between cadets was forbidden, seen as a distraction from duty, a potential compromise of the chain of command. We'd lose everything, I said quietly. Our commissions, our futures. Is it worth the risk? James asked, his eyes searching mine. There was no pressure in his question, only the honesty. A genuine willingness to follow my lead, whatever I decided. In response, I kissed him again, pouring everything I couldn't yet say into the press of my lips against his. Yes, the kiss said. You are worth any risk. When we parted, his smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. We'll be careful, he promised. No one needs to know. We stayed in the tower until the eastern sky began to lighten, talking in hushed voices, learning each other anew through gentle touches and careful words. We spoke of when our feelings had first changed, of moments when we'd almost confessed, of fears overcome and still facing us. As dawn approached, we reluctantly separated, knowing we needed to return to our room before reveille. At the base of the tower, James pulled me into one last embrace, his lips finding mine with unerring accuracy, even in the pre-dawn gloom. This changes everything, he whispered against my mouth. And nothing, I replied. I'm still me, you're still you, we're just more honest now. We walked back toward Hamilton Hall as the first birds began to sing, keeping a respectable distance between us, already practicing the deception that would be necessary to protect what we'd found. At the edge of the training ground, the eastern sky blushed pink and gold, heralding a new day. From across the campus came the distant beat of drums, the reveille cadence beginning, calling all cadets to rise and begin their duties. James turned to me, his face serious in the gathering light. Tonight, meet me at the old chapel. We'll figure it out. I nodded, my heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. I'll be there. He smiled then, a quick flash of brightness before his expression settled back into the neutral mask of Cadet Evans, perfect student and soldier. But his eyes still held the warmth I'd seen in the tower, a secret light meant only for me. As the drums grew louder, we turned toward the sound, 2 cadets reporting for duty, outwardly unchanged but inwardly transformed, ready to risk everything for the chance at something neither of us had dared imagine until now. His smile was tinged with sadness. Always the tactician. But yes, we have a plan. And when has a Blackwood battle plan ever failed? We both laughed, the sound carrying across the quiet campus. In that moment, standing beneath the same stars that had witnessed our first kiss in this very spot, I felt a certainty that transcended fear or doubt. Whatever challenges lay ahead, separation, secrecy, the careful navigation of military careers while protecting our private truth, we would face them together, even when physically apart. James leaned in, his lips finding mine with familiar ease. I love you, he whispered against my mouth. I should have said it months ago, but I think I was afraid. Saying it made it too real, too important to lose. The words sent heat coursing through me, a joy so intense it bordered on pain. I love you too, I replied, my voice breaking slightly on the confession. I think I have since that first year, when you stayed up all night with me after the call about my father. He pulled me closer, his arms strong around my waist. We're going to make this work, Eli. I promise you that. Below us, the academy slept, unaware of the vows being exchanged on its ancient tower. Above us, the stars continued their eternal dance, witnesses to a love that had flourished against all odds, within stone walls meant to teach discipline and duty, but which had also, unexpectedly, sheltered something just as powerful, just as necessary: the quiet courage of two hearts recognizing each other across all barriers. "I believe you," I said, sealing my words with a kiss. "Some things are simply meant to be." As we descended the tower stairs hand in hand, I carried with me the certainty that whatever the future held, separation and reunion, challenge and triumph, the path we had chosen together would lead us home to each other again and again until we no longer needed to hide, until our night patrols and secret meetings gave way to the open light of day.